She was sitting in the dirt on the side of a mountain road, with her wrists raw from rope burns, her dress torn at the hem, and her eyes fixed on the ground like she was already used to being left behind. When his horse slowed, she didn't look up. She just said, "Please keep riding, sir. I'm not worth the trouble I'll bring you." Nathan Cole had heard a lot of things in his life, but he had never heard a person apologize for existing. He got down from that horse. If this story already has your heart, hit subscribe and follow along until the very end. I promise you this one will stay with you, and drop your city in the comments below. I want to see just how far this story travels. The summer of 1876 was the kind that pressed down on a man's shoulders like a second coat he couldn't take off. Even up in the high country of Colorado Territory, where the pines cut the worst of the heat, and the air usually carried something cool off the peaks, that July had been relentless. The kind of summer that made the cattle restless and the creeks run lower than they should, and grown men squint at the sky like it had personally offended them. Nathan Cole had been on the trail for 4 days coming back from Glenwood Springs, where he'd sold 6 head of cattle to a buyer who paid fair and didn't waste time with small talk. That suited Nathan fine. He didn't have much use for small talk either. He had a ranch to get back to 40 acres of hard-won land on the eastern slope of the Elk Mountains, a barn that needed a new crossbeam before August, and a pair of mares that didn't like being left for too long without familiar company. He wasn't thinking about anything particular when he came around the bend on the narrow pass road. He was thinking about the crossbeam maybe, or about whether the creek that fed his south pasture had dropped too low to be useful. He was thinking about the kind of ordinary things a man alone thinks about when the trail is quiet and the hours are long. And then he saw the wagon. It was pulled to the side of the road at an odd angle, one wheel sitting crooked on a rock like it had stopped in a hurry. The horse that should have been hitched to it was gone. The reins were just hanging loose over the front board, trailing in the dirt. A carpet bag sat in the wagon bed, with its latch open, a few folded papers scattered out across the wood, like they'd been gone through in a rush and not put back proper. He slowed his horse without deciding to. It was just what a man did when something wasn't right. And that was when he noticed her. She was sitting a few feet off the road in the dry grass, her back straight in the way of a woman who'd been taught to sit straight whether she felt like it or not. Her dress was a faded blue, the kind of blue that used to be brighter once. The hem was torn and dusty. Her dark hair had come half down from where it had been pinned, and one of her hands was pressed against her side in a way that wasn't casual. She wasn't crying. She wasn't calling out for help. She was just sitting there with her eyes fixed on the middle distance, like she'd made a decision to be very still and was holding to it hard. Nathan pulled up. His horse snorted and shifted, and at the sound of it, she finally looked up. Her eyes were the kind of dark brown that caught light even when the rest of a person's face was closed off. And her face was closed off, or trying to be. There was a cut along her left cheekbone that had dried brown at the edges. Her wrists folded in her lap had the red raw look of skin that had been bound tight and recently. She looked at him for a moment. Then she looked away. "Please keep riding, sir," she said. Her voice was steady, quieter than he expected, but steady. "I'm not worth the trouble I'll bring you." Nathan didn't move. He looked at the wagon, at the scattered papers, at the way she was holding her side. "You hurt?" he asked. "I'll manage." "That ain't what I asked." She didn't answer that. She just kept her eyes on some point past his left shoulder jaw set, like she was waiting for him to decide she wasn't his problem and move along. Most men would have. He got down from the horse. She stood up immediately, faster than a woman with a hand pressed to her ribs probably should have, and took one step back. "I told you," she said. And now there was something sharp in her voice, something that had more warning in it than fear. "You don't want to be involved in this." "Maybe not," he said. He kept his distance, hands loose at his sides, the way you'd hold yourself around a horse that had reason not to trust people. "But I can't ride past a woman sitting in the dirt on a mountain road and call myself decent, so I won't." She studied him. There was a particular kind of studying that women who'd been given reasons to be careful did. It wasn't just looking. It was measuring, calculating, deciding. He let her do it. "Who are you?" she asked finally. "Nathan Cole. I've got a ranch about 2 hours east of here." He nodded toward the wagon. "That yours?" It was. "What happened to your horse?" Her chin lifted slightly. "They took it." "Who?" She was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that wasn't empty, it was full of things she was deciding whether or not to say. "The people who made sure nobody would believe me," she said at last. Nathan looked at her for a long moment. At the cut on her cheek. At her wrists. At the way she was standing, like she'd already braced for whatever came next, like she'd gotten used to bracing. "What's your name?" he asked. Another pause. Like even giving her name was something she had to think about. "Clara," she said. "Clara Whitmore. Miss Whitmore." He picked up his hat, resettled it. "I'm not going to ask you anything else right now, but I'm not leaving you on this road. If you want to walk, I'll ride slow alongside you. If you want to ride, I'll walk my horse. Whatever makes you less uncomfortable, but I'm not leaving." She stared at him. "Why?" she said. Not grateful, more like suspicious. Like kindness was something she'd learned to examine for the hidden cost. "Because everyone else rode past you," he said simply. "And I'm tired of being like everyone else." Clara Whitmore did not take his horse. She let him help her into the wagon seat and rode there while he tied his horse to the back and drove. She didn't speak for the first mile. Neither did he. The road wound up through the timber, the late afternoon light coming through the pines in long slanted bars, and the only sounds were the wheels on the rocky track and the horses breathing, and somewhere far off, a hawk calling once and going quiet. He noticed her shift her weight carefully every time the wagon hit a rut. He didn't comment on it. After a while, she said, "You can ask." "I told you I wouldn't." "You're thinking it." "Probably," he agreed. "But thinking and asking are different things." She was quiet again. Then, 3 ribs, I think. Maybe 2. I've had worse." Nathan kept his eyes on the road. "How long ago?" "This morning." His hands tightened on the reins just slightly. He made himself loosen them. "Did they leave you here on purpose?" "Yes." She said it flat, without drama, like it was just a fact of the physical world. "They wanted to send a message. That there was nowhere safe for me to go. That anyone who helped me would regret it." She turned to look at him. "I mean that, Mr. Cole. I'm not saying it to make you feel brave. I'm saying it because it's true, and you deserve to know what you're walking into." "Noted," he said. "You should turn around." "I heard you the first time." She looked at him a moment longer, then turned back to the road ahead. "You're a stubborn man," she said. "I've been told." Something moved across her face, not quite a smile, but related to one. It was gone in an instant. "My ranch isn't far," he said. "You can rest there tonight. Tomorrow you can decide whatever you want to decide. Nobody's going to make you do anything. You don't know who these people are. Not yet." He kept his voice even. "But I've lived in Colorado territory long enough to know that men who hurt a woman and leave her on a mountain road aren't as powerful as they want people to think they are. Power doesn't need to do that." Clara didn't respond to that, but she stopped arguing. Peg. His ranch was small. He wouldn't have called it humble, he'd worked too hard for it to use a word that soft, but it was honest about what it was. A cabin built solid against the winters. A barn newer than the cabin, which told you something about his priorities. A kitchen garden along the south wall that was doing better this year than last. A split-rail fence around the near pasture where his 2 mares lifted their heads when the wagon came in and then went back to grazing like they'd merely been confirming it was him. Clara looked at it all with a careful, measuring eye that he was starting to recognize as just how she looked at things. "It's solid," she said, like she was giving him information. "Built it myself," he said. "Took 3 years. You live alone?" "Yes." "There's no woman here?" "No." She nodded like she was cataloging that. "I want to be clear about something," she said, and her voice had gone back to that careful steadiness. "I am grateful. I don't intend to be any trouble. I will earn my keep while I'm here, however long that is. But I don't—" She paused. "I don't want pity. I don't want someone deciding things for me. And I don't want to be a burden that makes a man feel like a hero." Nathan stepped down from the wagon. He came around to her side and offered his hand, which she looked at for a moment before taking. "I don't need to feel like a hero," he said. "I just need to feel like I did what was right." She stepped down carefully, keeping her weight shifted just so. "Those are different things," she said. "Yes, ma'am," he agreed. "They are." He gave her the cabin's back room, which had a cot and a window that faced east, and a wooden box that held a spare blanket. He brought water for washing, and didn't hover. He heated soup from what he had and set it on the table, and called her when it was ready, like she was a guest and not a problem. She came out washed, and with her hair repinned and her spine as straight as it had been on the road, and she sat down across from him and ate with the focused efficiency of someone who hadn't eaten since morning and wasn't going to let pride interfere with survival. He ate too. They didn't talk much. But it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was more the kind that settles between two people who are both used to quiet, and neither of them is trying to fill it with something it doesn't need. After she helped wash the tin bowls without being asked, he dried. They stood side by side at the basin in the same natural, unspoken rhythm of people who didn't need to announce their helpfulness. "You were a teacher," he said. He wasn't sure why he said it. Something about the way she'd looked at the shelf of books against the wall when she'd first come in. She looked at him sideways. "In Millhaven," she said. "For 3 years." "What happened?" She was quiet for a moment, her hands still in the water. "Have you heard of Harlan Greer?" The name landed with a small, cold weight. Yes, he'd heard of Harlan Greer. Most people in the territory had. A land broker out of Millhaven, the kind of man who showed up in a new place with a lawyer and a handshake, and left with more than he'd arrived with, and nobody quite sure how it had happened. "I've heard the name," Nathan said carefully. "He wanted my land," Clara said. She didn't look at him. She kept her eyes on the basin. "My parents' land, 40 acres along Carpenter Creek. Good water, good pasture. My father homesteaded it in 1861. He's been dead 6 years. My mother 3. Her voice stayed even through all of it, the flatness of someone who'd already done their grieving and wasn't going to perform it again. "When I wouldn't sell, Greer started talking. Told people I'd falsified my parents' deed, that the land was never legally theirs, that I'd been misrepresenting myself as the owner for years." Nathan set down the dish he was drying. "That's a serious accusation," he said. "Yes, it is." She finally looked at him. "And it was a lie. Every word of it. I have the original deed. I have my father's correspondence with the land office. I have 20 years of tax receipts." Something moved through her eyes. Not tears, something harder. "But Harlan Greer has friends in town. He has the sheriff's ear, and the bank president's ear, and the ear of every man who thinks that a woman alone is someone whose story doesn't need to be listened to carefully." She pulled her hands from the water and dried them on the cloth he handed her. "He had my property impounded pending review. And then, someone came to my house last night and told me that if I filed a complaint with the territorial court the next time they found me, I wouldn't be walking away." The cabin was quiet, except for the sound of the fire settling. "And this morning?" Nathan asked. "This morning I put my deed and my documents in a bag, and I got in my wagon, and I was going to Salida to find a lawyer who didn't know Harlan Greer." She looked at him steadily. "They caught me on the South Road. 3 men. They took my horse, threw my things, and made sure I understood that the offer to disappear quietly was the last one I was going to get." "They hit you. One of them." She said it without expression. "When I wouldn't give them the papers." "Did they get the papers?" For the first time, something that wasn't grief or caution moved across her face. It was small and fierce, and it changed everything about her expression for just a second. She reached into the pocket of her dress and pulled out a folded envelope worn at the crease. "No," she said. They did not. He didn't sleep much that night. He lay on his cot in the main room. He'd given her the only proper room without a second thought, and would do the same again. And he stared at the dark ceiling and thought about what she'd told him. He thought about Harlan Greer, whom he'd never met but whose name carried a particular reputation in the territory. The kind of man who operated just inside the edges of what you could prove. The kind of man who wore a good suit and spoke in complete sentences and had a way of making the dishonest thing sound like just good business sense. And he thought about Clara Whitmore sitting in the dirt on that mountain road with 2 broken ribs and an envelope of documents she'd refused to hand over to 3 men who'd given her plenty of reason to. He thought about what it cost a person to be that stubborn for that long. He thought about how she'd looked at him across the table over soup, not with gratitude exactly, but with something more complicated. The look of a person who was rationing their trust very carefully because they'd learned the hard way that trust given too freely became a weapon in other people's hands. He'd known that look on himself once. After the war. After Eleanor. After the years when the world had taken things from him without asking, and he'd gotten real careful about what he let himself need. He understood that look. He didn't know what he was going to do about any of this. That wasn't entirely true. He had a sense of what he was going to do, which was the thing that scared him a little, because it was going to make his life considerably more complicated, and he had spent a long time carefully constructing a life that wasn't complicated. But he kept seeing her hand pressed to her ribs. He kept hearing the flat, matter-of-fact way she'd said, "When I wouldn't give them the papers." Some things you couldn't unknow. He closed his eyes and waited for morning. She was already up when he came out at dawn. She'd built the fire and started the coffee and was sitting at the table with her documents spread out in front of her, organized into 3 piles with the focused precision of someone who had sorted and resorted them enough times that the ordering was automatic. She looked up when he came in. There were shadows under her eyes. "You didn't sleep either," he said. "I don't sleep well in strange places." She said it matter-of-fact, not apologetic. "Your coffee's on." He poured a cup and sat across from her without asking if that was all right. "Tell me about the deed," he said. She looked at him for a moment. Then she picked up the paper on top of the center pile and passed it across to him. He read carefully. He wasn't a lawyer, but he'd done enough land business in his life to know how a document was supposed to look. This one looked right. The date, the signatures, the land office stamp, all of it. "The original," she said. "Registered in 1861. My father's name and my mother's. And here," she slid another paper across, "is the transfer of title when they passed. Standard inheritance. Filed with the Territorial Land Office in 1873. And Greer says this is falsified. He says the original registration never happened. That someone filed fraudulent paperwork in 1861, and it wasn't caught at the time." Her voice was very even. "It's a specific kind of lie, Mr. Cole, because it's the kind that's almost impossible to disprove. The original land office records from 1861 are incomplete. There was a fire in the Salida office in 1869. So some records are missing. Greer is claiming mine are among them, and that this," she touched the deed, "is a forgery." "But you have the original," "which he says is the forgery." Nathan sat back and looked at her. "He had this planned," he said, "for at least a year, I think." She gathered the papers and began refolding them with precise, practiced movements. "He's done it before. There's a family in Gunnison, the Harpers, who lost 60 acres to him 2 years ago in almost the same way, and a widow north of Salida who signed over her land because she didn't understand she didn't have to." Clara's jaw was tight. "He finds people who are alone, or who don't have someone who'll fight for them, and he picks them apart piece by piece until there's nothing left to hold on to. And he didn't expect you to fight." She met his eyes. "No," she said, "he didn't." There was something in how she said it, quiet and certain, and carrying the weight of every day she'd spent being underestimated, that settled in Nathan's chest like a coal catching. He drank his coffee. She resorted her papers. The fire crackled between them. "There's a man in Salida," Nathan said after a while. "Ezra Holt. He's a lawyer, the real kind, not the kind that Greer keeps in his pocket. He worked for the territorial court for 15 years before he went into private practice." He paused. "He's also the kind of man who doesn't like it when people use the law as a hammer on folks who can't afford a hammer back." Clara was watching him. "I know of him," she said carefully. "I can get you to Salida," Nathan said. "Day and a half ride. I know the back trail's nothing that goes through Millhaven." He looked at her steadily. "Greer's men will be watching the main roads, but there's ways through the high country that don't show up on any map Harlan Greer is likely to own." She was quiet for a long moment. Her hands were still on the papers. "Why?" she asked. The same word she'd used on the road. But it had a different weight to it now, less suspicious, more careful. Like she was genuinely trying to understand something. "Because what he's doing is wrong," Nathan said. "And because I've got the time, and I know the trail, and I don't have any particular reason to let a man like Harlan Greer keep winning. It could put you at risk. He has people everywhere. My land's free and clear, and I've never given Greer anything to use against me." He set down the cup. "Which means I'm about the worst possible target he could have chosen to tangle with." Clara looked at him across the table, that measuring look, the careful calibration. "You're serious," she said. "Yes, ma'am." She pressed her lips together. Something shifted in her expression, something small and private and effortful, like a door opening that she'd gotten used to keeping shut. "All right," she said quietly. "All right," he said. "I'll need a day," she said. "My ribs." "Take 2, he said. "I've got that crossbeam to deal with anyway." She looked at him, and this time, the thing that moved across her face was more clearly what it was. "Thank you," she said. It came out a little rough, like the words had been sitting unused for long enough that they weren't entirely easy to say. "Don't mention it," he said, and meant it. She rested, and she didn't rest well, and she helped anyway. The second day she was at his ranch, he found her in the barn before breakfast, talking quietly to his mares in the unhurried way of someone who'd grown up around horses. The older mare, who was famously particular about strangers, had her nose against Clara's shoulder and was standing there with her eyes half closed. Nathan leaned on the doorframe and watched that for a moment before she heard him. "She likes you," he said. Clara patted the mare's neck, once firm and affectionate. "She's a good horse. She just needed someone to be still with her for a minute." He thought about that as he went to start the fire. He thought about it again later when she insisted on helping him with the crossbeam, despite his pointed look at her ribs, and then sat on the fence rail and handed him tools and didn't say a word that wasn't useful. He thought some people make the world quieter just by being in it. He hadn't expected to think that. He hadn't thought it about anyone in a long time. That evening she made biscuits with what he had in the pantry, and they ate at the table again, and this time they talked more about the territory, about the land, about the way things had changed in the 10 years since the war. She had opinions, and she stated them plainly without hedging, without looking to see if he agreed before she finished the sentence. He found he liked that. He'd spent time around enough people who said what they thought you wanted to hear to have a deep appreciation for someone who didn't bother. "You said you were a teacher," he said. "Do you miss it?" She was quiet for a moment, looking at her plate. "I miss the children," she said. "The older ones especially. The ones who'd figured out that school was a way out of something, and were holding on to it with both hands." She turned her tin cup in her fingers. "I had a girl last year, 12 years old, Maddie Crenshaw, who was reading at a level most grown men in town couldn't match. Her father wanted to pull her out to help with the house. I went to see him 4 times before he agreed to let her stay through the spring term." A pause. "I don't know what happened to her after I left." "You'll find out," he said. It came out without thinking about it. "When this is done." She looked at him across the table. You say that like it's certain, she said. I say it like I intend to help make it certain, he said. Which isn't the same thing, but it's close enough for tonight. She looked at him for a long moment. Something moved through her eyes that was complicated and tired, and something else, something he didn't try to name yet because it wasn't time for names. You're a strange man, Mr. Cole, she said at last. Nathan, he said. A pause. Nathan, she said, like she was trying the word out. He cleared the table, and she helped, and the fire burned down, and outside the mountain, summer night settled over the ranch with all its stars and its cricket song, and its vast and patient quiet. On the morning of the third day, Nathan saddled the horses before dawn. Clara came out in the gray light, with her carpetbag repacked, now her documents in their careful order, and her spine straight, and her jaw set, and the look on her face of a woman who had decided something and was going to hold to it regardless of what came next. She stopped when she saw both horses ready. You're coming, she said. Not quite a question. Yes, he said. She nodded. One short, precise nod. Then let's go, she said. They rode out as the first color came into the eastern sky. Behind them, the ranch sat quiet in the early summer light. The mares in the pasture watched them go. The mountains ahead of them were still carrying the last of the night's shadow on their upper slopes. Clara rode straight-backed and steady beside him, her eyes on the trail, her hand loose on the reins. She didn't look back. Nathan rode and didn't talk much, and watched the trail and watched her, and thought about a man named Harlan Greer, who had decided a woman alone had no one to fight for her. Harlan Greer. Nathan Cole thought had made his last mistake. The trail through the high country was nothing like the main road to Salida, and that was exactly the point. Nathan knew every turn of it, the way it cut north along the ridge before dropping down through the aspen stands, the creek crossing that looked impassable until you knew to angle upstream 20 yards to where the bottom was gravel and solid. He'd ridden it in the dark before. He'd ridden it in snow. He knew where it was forgiving and where it wasn't, and he kept them moving at a pace that was fast enough to matter and slow enough not to lose a horse on a loose rock switchback. Clara kept up without complaint. She rode the way she did everything quiet-focused, with a precision that told you she was paying attention to more than just the trail in front of her. Every so often, he'd catch her scanning the tree line, or turning her head at a sound, and he understood that she wasn't doing it out of nervousness. She was doing it out of habit. The habit of a woman who had been hunted. They didn't talk much in the first hours. The trail demanded attention, and they both gave it that. But around mid-morning, when the route flattened out along a high meadow ridge and the horses could walk easier, she spoke first. "How long have you been on this land?" she asked. 12 years, he said. "Came out from Missouri after the war, spent 2 years working someone else's cattle before I had enough to file my own claim." "You fought?" "Yes." She didn't ask which side. People out here didn't usually. The war was far enough gone that most had decided what a man was now mattered more than what uniform he'd worn then. He appreciated that. "You came out here alone?" she asked.